It is the summer of 2000. A 16-year-old girl is sitting at the front desk of a luxury spa at Mar-a-Lago. She is reading a book about massage techniques. This girl grew up poor, not the kind of poor people talk about casually, the kind where you count everything before you touch it, the kind where you already know, without bitterness, that almost nothing around you actually belongs to you. Then the door opens. A middle-aged woman walks in. Sharp bob haircut, a handbag worth more than this girl has ever held in her hands. She speaks with a warm British accent and introduces herself as Ghislaine. She asks sweetly whether the girl is interested in massage therapy, and then she makes an offer. She tells her that she has a very wealthy friend, a member of the same club, who is looking for a personal massage therapist. The girl could learn her trade and get paid at the same time. For a 16-year-old with no money and no connections, the answer feels obvious. She says yes. A few days later, her father drives her to a large pink mansion on Palm Beach Island. Ghislaine meets her at the entrance, polite and warm as ever. And what happens inside that house on that day will follow this girl for the rest of her life. 10 years later, in Australia, a journalist named Sharon Churcher sits across from the same girl. She is hearing this story for the very first time. The girl reaches into her bag and pulls out a photograph. Before she even hands it over, she says quietly, "I am not sure I should be showing you this." The journalist takes it. In the photograph, she sees Prince Andrew, a member of the British royal family, standing with his arm around the girl's waist. And in the background, Ghislaine Maxwell is smiling. The girl is 16 years old in that photograph, and the story behind it is worse than anything the image shows. That girl's name is Virginia Giuffre, and the man inside that pink mansion was Jeffrey Epstein. When that story reached the public, it became the first crack in a wall that had protected Epstein and his network for decades. But in January of 2026, the United States Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of Epstein's files. And what those files reveal is not just about one man. They reveal an entire machine, a machine built over 30 years and kept running by money, silence, and the protection of the most powerful institutions in the world. Today we are going through those files. We are going to take them one by one. And I want to warn you now that this gets progressively worse as we go. By the end, I think the most disturbing thing you will find is not what Epstein did. It is who knew, who had the power to stop it, and who chose not to. My team and I have spent weeks going through these documents. We are going to give you the facts as clearly and honestly as we can. So let us begin. Jeffrey Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. He came from a modest family and dropped out of university by 1974 with nothing remarkable to his name. But over the next 15 years, through a combination of connections, charm, and calculated deception, he built himself into a wealthy and influential figure. He constructed a financial management company called J. Epstein and Company, claiming to serve only clients worth $1 billion or more. It was largely built on myth, but the myth was enough. He hinted to people that his money came from intelligence work for secret billionaire clients whose names he could never reveal. That mystery gave him power. It made people afraid to question him. And as we will see later, that part about intelligence work may have actually been true. Before we reach the darkest material, let us first look at the scale of his connections. Because your reaction to the names in these flight logs and emails will tell you everything about why this was allowed to go on for so long. The flight logs to Epstein's private island, Little St. James, include the names of Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, the sitting president and a former president of the United States. Also listed are Prince Andrew of England and public figures including Kevin Spacey and Mick Jagger. A 2010 email shows Epstein being granted security clearance for a private event involving some of the most powerful politicians in the world. The message reads, "Jeffrey, please come. You may have private time with each. Your security clearance is approved." In 2011, emails reference a donation discussion involving American investor Leon Black. In 2012, correspondence connects Epstein to the head of the Nobel Prize Committee. In 2013, an email casually asks what Epstein wants for dinner with Woody Allen. And a Dubai billionaire described a lunch at the Élysée Palace involving Emmanuel Macron, who was then France's Minister of Economy and would later become its president. On the surface, these connections look like the ordinary social life of a wealthy and well-connected man. Beneath the surface, the FBI was building a case against one of the largest trafficking networks in history. Now, I want to pause here and be direct with you. What follows is disturbing. If at any point you need to step away, please do. But I believe this story needs to be told clearly and completely, because the people who suffered deserve that. On January 30th, 2026, the Department of Justice released over 3 million pages of documents, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos. What they reveal is not just the crimes of one man. They reveal how a network of powerful people enabled, protected, and in some cases participated in those crimes. And they reveal how governments with the evidence to act chose instead to stay silent. The first layer of these files is about access, how Epstein built loyalty among the powerful. Richard Branson built the Virgin Group and positioned himself as the world's most accessible billionaire. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth, and in 2013, 2 years after Epstein had already pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor and registered as a sex offender, Branson sent him an email. He wrote, "Dear Jeffrey, it was really nice seeing you yesterday. The boys in water sports cannot stop talking about it. Anytime you are in the area, would love to see you, as long as you bring your harem." He used the word harem to a registered sex offender. In that same email chain, there is a suggestion that Bill Gates publicly described Epstein as someone who had merely slipped up years ago by being with a 17-and-a-half-year-old woman, and that he had learned his lesson. A spokesperson for Branson said the word harem referred to 3 adult women and that Branson had been misled. No investigation followed. Peter Attia is a well-known physician with a best-selling book and a public brand built around health and longevity. On June 24, 2015, he sent Epstein an email about receiving a new shipment. Epstein responded and included an image that the FBI fully redacted from the released files. Attia responded to the image with, "Please tell me you found that picture online." Epstein replied, "Afraid not." The DOJ does not redact random images. They redact the worst material. Material deemed unfit for any public release. What was in that image remains unknown. In the same email thread, Attia wrote something so explicit about a female victim that I am not going to repeat it here. What I will say is that a physician trusted by millions of people wrote that to a convicted sex offender. On February 3, 2026, Attia publicly acknowledged that the emails were embarrassing, tasteless, and indefensible. He stated that he had never been on Epstein's plane or island and had not been present at any parties. No victim has named him and no criminal charges followed, but a fully redacted FBI image sits in his email thread, and no one in authority has asked what it showed. Now we come to a more prominent name. Elon Musk is the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, the owner of X, the financier of Donald Trump's 2024 election campaign to the sum of $277 million, and currently the wealthiest person on Earth. During a public dispute with Trump in 2025, Musk posted that the real reason the Epstein files had not been fully released was that Trump was in them. He also stated that he himself was among the innocent people mentioned in the documents. But the files tell a different story. On November 25, 2011, Musk emailed Epstein asking, "What day or night will be the wildest party on your island?" 1 month later, the exchange continued. Musk wrote that he had been working to the edge of his sanity and that once his children returned home after Christmas, he wanted to hit the party scene in St. Bart's and just let loose. He said that the invitation to the island was appreciated, but that a peaceful island experience was the opposite of what he was looking for. Epstein responded, "Understood. I will see you in St. Bart's. The ratio on my island might make Tallulah uncomfortable." The ratio he referred to was the ratio of young women to men on the island, apparently high enough that Musk's partner at the time would have been uncomfortable. On February 2, 2026, Musk wrote publicly on his own platform that Epstein had hounded him relentlessly to visit the island and that he had always declined. But the files show that Musk wanted to go. The only reason the visit did not happen was that Epstein canceled, writing, "Bad news. Unfortunately, my schedule will keep me in New York. I was really looking forward to finally spending some time together with just fun on the agenda." Epstein canceled. Musk did not decline. And the wealthiest and most politically connected man on Earth appears to have publicly misrepresented what the files show. No investigation followed. These emails from Branson, Attia, and Musk represent only the outermost layer. The next set of files moves from access to control. This is where Epstein did not just know powerful people. He owned them. His method was constructed carefully. In the 1980s, he used his connection to Les Wexner to misappropriate approximately $46 million. He used that wealth to build the myth of a brilliant financial mind who only accepted clients worth $1 billion or more. When people asked where his money came from, he deflected with hints about intelligence work and secret clients he could not name. That mystery made him seem too important and too dangerous to challenge. His method with every person in his network began the same way. He gave. He offered private jets, exclusive invitations, introductions to extraordinary people. He arranged White House tours for Woody Allen. He offered Branson a connection to the head of the Nobel Committee. He paid Adia over $100,000 to serve as his personal physician. He offered Musk access to his helicopter, his island, and his social world. Once someone had accepted enough of that generosity, they became socially indebted. Their reputation became tied to his, and cutting him off meant cutting off the entire network and risking everything that connection had built for them. He understood with a predator's precision that the most powerful people are also the most afraid of losing what they have. But Epstein also used a darker method, and that brings us to Bill Gates. Over the past 2 decades, Gates has directed billions of dollars toward fighting malaria, preventable disease, and global poverty. He and Epstein first met in 2011 when Gates was told that Epstein could help identify wealthy donors for the Gates Foundation. On December 11, 2014, Gates emailed Epstein to say he had enjoyed a breakfast meeting and that it had been a productive conversation about philanthropy. On the surface, it looked like a professional relationship. But on July 18, 2013, Epstein wrote a draft letter that was never sent. It was saved, filed, and found in the released documents, and it reveals everything. The letter begins by expressing dismay that Gates had chosen to end their friendship. It references an unnamed event described as an accident and accuses Gates of asking Epstein to be a major actor in a cover-up to protect his reputation. Then it goes further. Epstein writes that Gates, with tears in his eyes, had asked him to delete emails regarding an STD. He references Gates providing antibiotics to be given to his wife Melinda without her knowledge. He mentions an undisclosed name that he says must remain between them. And a second draft adds references to helping Gates manage the consequences of encounters with Russian girls and facilitating secret meetings with married women. Gates has denied the contents of these letters and described them as unsent drafts. That is true. They were unsent, but they were written, saved, and kept. Epstein held them deliberately, and again, no investigation followed. We now have seen the same pattern repeat 4 times. Branson makes a disturbing joke and walks free. Musk lies about his intentions and walks free. Gates sits in files that suggest active blackmail and walks free. And Virginia, at 16, walked out with $200 and a door closing behind her. There is one more name I need to address here, and it is someone who made a direct statement to Congress. Howard Lutnick is the current United States Secretary of Commerce under the Trump administration. He was also Epstein's next-door neighbor in New York. In an October 2025 interview, Lutnick stated that he had cut all ties with Epstein in 2005 and told Congress that he barely had anything to do with that person, claiming roughly 10 emails over 14 years. But in 2012, Lutnick emailed Epstein directly. He wrote asking about dinner plans and suggesting they meet in St. Bart's. That is one email. And there are over 250 documents in the released files that include his name, the majority of which directly contradict what he told Congress. He made false statements to Congress and to the public. When asked about this, a Trump spokesperson said the president fully supports his secretary. Lutnick remains in his position without consequence. Now we reach the core of what these files reveal. Not just who Epstein knew, but what was actually happening, and how governments knew and chose to protect the perpetrators rather than the victims. Bill Clinton served as the 42nd president of the United States from 1993 to 2001. Epstein donated to Clinton's 1992 campaign, and that is how their relationship began. Between 2002 and 2003, Clinton logged 26 flights on Epstein's private jet to locations across Africa, Asia, and Russia. Among the released photographs is an image of Clinton on Epstein's jet. The woman sitting beside him has her face redacted. That redaction matters because the FBI was specifically instructed to redact the faces of trafficking victims, which means the woman in that photograph with the former president is a documented victim. A second photograph shows Clinton in a swimming pool alongside Maxwell and another victim whose face is also redacted. A third shows Clinton shirtless in a hot tub beside a victim. None of these images alone constitute criminal evidence, but the former president of the United States was photographed in intimate settings with documented victims of a trafficking network on multiple occasions, and not one of those images has led to a subpoena. Virginia Giuffre stated that Clinton visited Little St. James and dined with Epstein and Maxwell. She also said he showed no sign of interest in the girls present. No victim has ever publicly accused Clinton of criminal conduct, but at his own trial, Epstein repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment when asked specifically about Clinton. Combined with 26 logged flights and multiple photographs beside redacted victims, it creates a picture that law enforcement has chosen not to examine. Now we turn to Donald Trump. Epstein and Trump met in the 1980s in the social circles of New York and Palm Beach. Both were wealthy, both were from New York, and by multiple accounts, they were genuinely close for over 15 years. In 2002, Trump told New York Magazine, "I have known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He is a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." He said that publicly, in a major publication, and people read it and moved on. A former Trump casino executive described the two men as best friends. Trump has claimed that he cut ties with Epstein in 2007 after Epstein allegedly flirted with the teenage daughter of a Mar-a-Lago member. The record suggests the real break was earlier and was driven primarily by a real estate dispute when Trump outbid Epstein on a Palm Beach property. In the January 2026 file release, an email from Epstein in 2011 reads, "I want you to realize that the dog that is not barked is Trump. Virginia spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned." A second email from 2019 states, "Virginia Roberts worked at Mar-a-Lago. She was the one who accused Prince Andrew. Trump said that he asked me to resign. Never a member ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop." Both emails suggest Trump spent significant time with Virginia and was aware of what was happening. However, Virginia herself stated in testimony that Trump never harmed her and that he could not have been friendlier. This is the same woman who named princes, politicians, and prime ministers without hesitation. She did not name Trump, but the files do not stop at emails. Multiple victim testimonies were submitted directly to the FBI. One involves a limousine driver who transported Trump in 1995. He described overhearing a phone call in which Trump repeatedly mentioned Jeffrey and referred to a young girl. The driver stated he was seconds away from pulling the car over. He said that when he eventually met the person Trump had been discussing, she told him directly that Trump had assaulted her alongside Epstein. The driver later reported that this same woman contacted him on Christmas Day to say she had called the police. He did not hear from her again until the following year when he was told she had been found dead in Oklahoma. Officers at the scene stated it could not have been a suicide. The coroner ruled it a suicide. In 2020, a separate victim submitted a statement to the FBI. She wrote that she was trafficked beginning when she was 13 years old, that she had been assaulted by over 176 men during a 6-month period in 1984, that those men included actors, musicians, politicians, athletes, royalty, and extremely wealthy individuals, and that a child she gave birth to during that period was killed and the body disposed of. She said she feared for her life in coming forward because these were people with the power to make her disappear. The FBI also compiled a document of allegations against Trump gathered from phone tips. It lists over a dozen separate claims, including allegations involving girls as young as 13 and references to parties that also involved Clinton. And yet Virginia Giuffre, the most credible victim in this entire case, said Trump did not harm her. Hold both of those things at the same time, because that is the honest picture these files present. Not a clean answer, not a verdict, just the unresolved weight of what is in there. What is not ambiguous is this: the sitting president of the United States is a man whose name appears in these files more than almost anyone else. And the official position of his government is that nothing in those 3.5 million pages requires any prosecution. How is that possible? Because this was not a failure of evidence. It was a failure of will. The FBI had Ghislaine Maxwell in their sights for years and did nothing. Epstein's own staff knew what was happening. An employee described cleaning up after Epstein's sessions, finding used items beside his bed, and placing a gun between his mattresses. His personal assistant, Alfredo Rodriguez, stole a copy of Epstein's private address book containing the names and contact details of the girls used in his network and tried to sell it to investigators. He was arrested. Not Epstein, the whistleblower. In 2002, journalist Vicky Ward investigated Epstein and found evidence of the abuse of two sisters, one of whom was a minor. She was preparing to publish. Epstein personally visited her editor and asked for the allegations to be removed. Shortly after, a bullet and the severed head of a cat appeared on the editor's doorstep. The accusations were cut from the article. Epstein was untouched. In 2005, after a direct report from the family of a 14-year-old girl who said she had been abused at his Palm Beach mansion, an investigation was finally launched. Police gathered consistent testimony from multiple underage victims. Epstein was arrested in July 2006. The FBI investigation identified over 30 underage victims. By May 2007, prosecutors had drafted a 60-count federal indictment that should have put Epstein in prison for the remainder of his life. The indictment stated that over a period of years, Epstein had recruited and exploited dozens of girls at properties in Manhattan and Palm Beach, that victims were as young as 14 years old, that Epstein knew many of his victims were minors and in some cases was told directly, and that he had worked with others to build and maintain this network across multiple states. Then federal prosecutor Alexander Acosta agreed to a plea deal. Epstein pleaded guilty to a single count of soliciting prostitution from someone under 18. He served 18 months in a work release arrangement that allowed him to leave the facility for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. All federal charges were dropped. Immunity was granted not only to Epstein, but to all unnamed co-conspirators. Every person who participated in that network was protected by a federal agreement, and their names were never made public. Epstein walked free and continued operating. He met with Bill Gates, he exchanged emails with Elon Musk, he settled civil lawsuits quietly, and by every available indication, he continued doing exactly what he had always done. In November 2018, journalist Julie Brown published a 3-part investigation in the Miami Herald titled Perversion of Justice. It exposed that Epstein had run a global trafficking network for years that law enforcement knew, and that he had been allowed to walk free. The public reaction was significant enough that the FBI's Manhattan office was forced to open a new investigation. On July 6, 2019, Epstein landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on a $60 million private jet. The tarmac was lined with unmarked vehicles. The moment the door opened, federal agents surrounded the aircraft. Jeffrey Epstein was placed under arrest for the second time. He did not resist. He knew it was over. He was held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, confined to his cell for 23 hours a day. On July 23, 2019, his cellmate found him on the floor with fabric around his neck. He survived. He was placed on suicide watch. After only 31 hours, he was taken off suicide watch and moved to a different cell. He complained of anxiety and said he had not slept in 20 days due to the noise of the facility. On August 9th, his new cellmate was transferred out under unexplained circumstances. No replacement was assigned. The 2 guards assigned to monitor Epstein that night were required to check on him every 30 minutes. Surveillance footage shows they did not. Both guards later stated they had fallen asleep for approximately 3 hours, and during that same window, almost every camera in or near the facility stopped recording simultaneously, all of them, at the same time. On August 10, 2019, around 6:30 in the morning, Epstein was found hanging in his cell. He was pronounced dead. The official cause was ruled suicide by hanging. I am now going to present what the files show and allow you to form your own conclusion. Surveillance footage from that night shows what the FBI described as a flash of orange moving up the stairs toward Epstein's tier around 10:39 in the evening, possibly someone carrying linen or bedding. This occurred while the facility was on lockdown. In an interview with one of the guards on duty that night, investigators asked why Epstein had extra clothing and extra linen in his cell. The guard stated she had never distributed linen, saying that was done on the prior shift. The extra linen is what Epstein reportedly used to hang himself, yet the guard said she had no knowledge of how it got there. The other guard confirmed that no inmate should have been on the tier alone that night. Authorities initially claimed that no one had entered Epstein's tier that evening. Their own surveillance log and footage contradict that claim directly. An investigator reviewing the physical evidence noted a significant problem. The piece of material recovered from the scene was not torn in a way consistent with how it should have appeared if it had been used as a ligature in a hanging. The investigator said plainly that it made her wonder whether this was even the item that killed him. Then there is a draft statement written by the U.S. Attorney about Epstein's death. It is dated August 9th. Epstein died on August 10th. The Department of Justice described this as a typographical error, a death announcement potentially drafted the day before the death occurred. Their official explanation is that someone typed the wrong date. the independent autopsy commissioned by Epstein's brother and conducted by Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist with 50 years of experience reviewing thousands of cases, found 3 fractures in Epstein's neck. Dr. Baden stated that in over 1,000 jail hanging cases he had reviewed, he had never seen that specific pattern of injury from a hanging. The ligature mark was positioned at the center of the neck rather than high under the jaw, where it is typically found in a hanging death. He concluded the injuries were more consistent with strangulation. We have a prior suicide attempt. We have guards who fell asleep for exactly the right period of time. We have cameras across the facility going dark simultaneously. We have a mysterious figure carrying linen toward the tier during lockdown. We have a guard who says she never distributed the linen found in the cell. We have a ligature that investigators questioned. We have an autopsy contradicting the official cause of death. And we have a death announcement drafted the day before he died. You can decide what you believe. What is certain is this: the only man who knew every name, every location, every person who had ever walked through those doors died in a federal facility under federal supervision before he could speak a single word in court. Now I need to tell you something that reframes everything we have discussed so far. When Alexander Acosta, the federal prosecutor who agreed to the 2008 plea deal, was later asked why he had accepted such a lenient arrangement for a case this serious, he reportedly stated that he had been told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. To understand what that might mean, you need to know who Ghislaine Maxwell's father was. Robert Maxwell was a British media mogul who owned major newspapers including the Daily Mirror. He was also, by extensive evidence and later public confirmation, an asset of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. When he died in 1991, Israel gave him a state funeral and buried him on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. The Israeli president stated publicly that his contributions to the country would never be forgotten. He was a newspaper publisher. Nations do not bury newspaper publishers on the Mount of Olives for good journalism. Something else was being acknowledged. When Robert Maxwell died and his empire collapsed, Ghislaine was left with connections but no money. Epstein had money. What they built together, according to a former senior officer in Israeli military intelligence named Ari Ben-Menashe, was a network specifically designed to place underage girls in front of powerful political figures, photograph what followed, and use those photographs as leverage, not as a byproduct of the abuse, as the purpose of it. If that is true, then every email, every flight log, every photograph of powerful men in Epstein's properties represents something other than what it appears to be. These men were not just attending parties, they were being managed. Among the 2026 files is an email from 2001 sent by a sender identified only as the Invisible Man. The sender describes being at Balmoral, the royal family's summer estate in Scotland, and writes about keeping the girls on a tight schedule because it was getting tiring splitting them up all the time. Investigators confirmed that Prince Andrew was at Balmoral during exactly that period. The email was signed with a name that the files associate with Andrew. In a 2010 exchange, Andrew writes asking whether a woman will be visiting and whether she will be bringing a message from Epstein. Epstein confirms she is 26, Russian, and already has Andrew's contact details. Andrew responds suggesting they have dinner at Buckingham Palace for privacy. Epstein writes back confirming his arrival in London and asking what time Andrew would like to meet, adding that they will also need private time. What a convicted sexual offender and a member of the royal family would need private time for is left to your interpretation. Also released among these files is a photograph of Prince Andrew leaning over what appears to be an unconscious woman. There is no caption. There is no explanation. There is simply this image in the official government release. As a result of his connection to Epstein, and prior to this image, Andrew was stripped of his royal titles and military honors in 2022. He continues to live on a large estate and faces multiple civil lawsuits. The British Prime Minister has called on him to testify before the United States Congress. He has declined. There is one final email between Andrew and Epstein that I have not mentioned yet. In it, Andrew forwards to Epstein a confidential intelligence brief produced by a military unit operating in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. It contains information about international investment opportunities in an active combat zone. A senior member of the British royal family forwarded classified military intelligence from a live conflict zone to a convicted sex offender. Why Epstein would want that material brings us back to the intelligence question. Stephen Hoffenberg, one of Epstein's former business associates, claimed that Epstein had first met Ghislaine Maxwell in 1988, while her father was still operating as an intelligence asset. Ben-Menashe stated publicly in 2019, shortly after Epstein's death, that Epstein had been recruited by Mossad and that the entire trafficking network was a deliberate intelligence operation designed to produce compromising material on powerful figures and establish leverage over them. To further complicate the picture, Epstein knew Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak personally. They met at least 30 times between 2013 and 2017. Photographers documented Barak entering Epstein's Manhattan building within hours of young girls entering the same building on multiple occasions. Epstein also carried a fake Austrian passport found during the 2019 raid, listing a residence in Saudi Arabia under the name Marius Robert Forlani. An IDF shirt was found on Little St. James Island, and in a 2018 email, before any public reporting had connected him to Israeli intelligence, Epstein wrote to an associate, "You should make clear that I do not work for Assad," with a smiley face. There was no public allegation at that time. There was nothing to joke about. The context for that message has never been explained. Whether Epstein was an intelligence asset will likely never be officially confirmed. What can be confirmed is simpler and more disturbing. Every room in every one of his properties was equipped with a permanent 24-hour surveillance system. Whatever the purpose of those recordings, we know what happened in those rooms. We know because the girls who survived told us. Now I am going to tell you Virginia's story in full, because it deserves to be told. After that first encounter at the Pink Mansion, Virginia returned to her job at the Mar-a-Lago spa. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath it, everything had. She was 16 years old, and she had already been used by two adults who had presented themselves as mentors. The phone rang. The British accent returned. Ghislaine Maxwell was asking her to come back. Virginia was not in a normal position to say no. She had been abused before Epstein, long before, in ways that had distorted her sense of what was normal. She was in desperate financial need. Her relationship with her mother was fractured, and she was too young, through no fault of her own, to recognize that what was being done to her was a crime. So, she went back. The same pattern repeated. She was used regularly. She was criticized and controlled. 2 weeks in, Epstein told her to quit her job and be available to him around the clock. In return, he would pay her $2,500 a month and cover an apartment so she could move away from her parents. When she hesitated, Epstein said, "We know where your brother goes to school, and I own the Palm Beach Police Department." Then he mentioned by name the man who had abused Virginia as a child before any of this began. He said it casually, as a reminder of what the alternative looked like. Virginia moved into the apartment. Her father drove her to Epstein's mansion in the mornings. He did not know. Her boyfriend even lived with her in the apartment Epstein was paying for. Nobody looked. Nobody asked. Over time, Virginia became Epstein's favorite. She was called in the middle of the night. She was required to dress him each morning, applying lotion to his feet, rolling his socks, holding his trousers open for him to step into. She massaged his feet and scalp in rituals that lasted over an hour. He showed her his private collection of photographs of underage girls as though presenting a library. He controlled what she ate. He gave her books and monitored what she read. Epstein and Maxwell constructed around her a simulation of parental care, something that looked like protection from the outside and functioned as captivity from the inside. And then Epstein began trafficking her to others. She was first sent to a billionaire whose pregnant wife was present. Virginia massaged the wife first, and then was forced into an encounter with the husband while the wife watched. She was trafficked to a prestigious academic conference attended by scientists and intellectuals. She was sent to a gubernatorial candidate who went on to win his election, to a former United States senator, to politicians, and to a modeling agent named Jean-Luc Brunel who assaulted her on multiple occasions, and who, like Epstein, died in custody just before his own trial in France. His death was also ruled a suicide. Prosecutors described Epstein's recruitment model as a pyramid scheme. Maxwell and her assistant Sarah Kellen would position themselves outside New York high schools at 3 in the afternoon when classes ended. They would identify the most vulnerable girls. They would approach them and offer $200 for a massage session with a wealthy man, and double if they brought a friend. They specifically targeted girls between the ages of 12 and 17 from low-income backgrounds and fractured homes. Girls they believed were too desperate or too naive to understand what was being done to them, and what happened to Virginia would happen to those girls too. They would be psychologically trapped, and as they aged out of Epstein's preference, they would be moved up the chain. They became recruiters. They became the adults waiting outside schools at 3 in the afternoon. Virginia was eventually moved into that role as well. In her memoir, she wrote, "The faces of the girls I recruited will always haunt me. I know their pain, and I will never get over playing a role in causing it." In March of 2001, Maxwell woke Virginia at the Manhattan property and told her that she would be meeting a handsome prince. They spent the day shopping. Virginia bought jeans with embroidery on them and a pink tank top. It felt like a good day. The people who had destroyed her sense of what was normal were also the people taking her shopping, and that had become her reference point for care. That afternoon, Prince Andrew arrived at Maxwell's Belgravia townhouse. He met Virginia. He looked at her and guessed her age at 17. He mentioned that he knew how old teenage girls looked because his daughters were around that age. And then the photograph was taken. This is the same photograph she held in her hands in that room in Australia 10 years later and said, "I am not sure I should be showing you this." By Virginia's account, hours after that photograph was taken, she was forced into a sexual encounter with Andrew. Epstein paid her $15,000. There was a second encounter, then a third. The final encounter she described as involving Andrew, Epstein, and approximately 8 other underage girls who did not speak English. In July of 2001, Virginia woke in a pool of blood at the Manhattan property. She was taken to hospital under the false claim that she was 18. Doctors found evidence consistent with a miscarriage. Epstein and his associates had never used protection. The abuse escalated. Epstein began using physical restraints. Virginia wrote that the pain was severe enough that she prayed to lose consciousness. She was trafficked to a man she described as a well-known prime minister on Little St. James Island. This man choked her until she blacked out. He laughed as she begged him to stop. He became more aroused by her fear. She emerged bleeding from her mouth and unable to breathe or swallow without pain for days. When she told Epstein she never wanted to see that man again, Epstein said calmly, "You will get that sometimes." That was her breaking point. In the summer of 2002, Epstein and Maxwell sat Virginia down and proposed that she carry Epstein's child. They offered $200,000 a month, a mansion, and round-the-clock staff. She would sign away all legal rights to any child born. Virginia sat across from the two people who had owned her life for 2 years and thought about what they would do with a female child. She did not say no directly. That would have been too dangerous. Instead, she reminded them of a promise they had made to send her to Thailand for professional massage training. She said she would consider the proposal if they honored that commitment first. They agreed. She flew to Thailand in September of 2002 with 6 suitcases packed so heavily they barely closed. She had no intention of returning. Before the flight, she was required to train Epstein's new assistant, a girl of approximately 15, in how to perform the massage sessions Epstein required. She was also tasked with recruiting a girl in Thailand. She did not recruit anyone. Instead, she met a 26-year-old Australian named Robert Jouffre. 10 days after arriving, she married him at a Buddhist temple on a mountaintop. That same night, she called Epstein and said, "I fell in love and got married, Jeffrey. I am never coming back." There was silence. Then Epstein said, "Have a great life." The line went dead. She never heard his voice again. Some disputed elements of Virginia's memoir. The FBI described the evidence for a trafficking ring involving senior political figures as scant. 2 other victims contradicted portions of her account. The contradictions are real and they matter, but so does this. In 2025, Virginia and Robert separated after 22 years of marriage. She was in court fighting a custody dispute over their 3 children. In March of 2025, she was hospitalized following a car accident that caused kidney failure. She underwent multiple surgeries. She became dependent on prescription medication. On April 25, 2025, Virginia Jouffre was found unresponsive at her farm in Western Australia. She was 41 years old. Her death was ruled a suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Her father disputed this. He said there is no way she did that. No evidence of foul play was found. She had made previous attempts on her own life. She died without seeing a single person she named in her testimony spend 1 day in prison for what they did to her. Her memoir, Nobody's Girl, was published after her death in October 2025. It became a bestseller. She never saw it reach shelves. She started this story sitting at a front desk with a massage book in her hands, trying to build something. She ended it in a farmhouse in Western Australia at the age of 41, and the men whose names are in those files are still in their homes. Now let me show you what the FBI found when they raided Epstein's properties. The Manhattan mansion has wide front doors and a grand staircase. Visible from the entrance is an oversized portrait of Bill Clinton painted in a blue dress. The property contains a large gym, multiple dining and kitchen areas, 4 to 6 bedrooms, and Epstein's private office with a piano and a stuffed tiger. There is a room with a round table and a pole, and there is a massage room that Virginia described as the dungeon, complete with a specialized table. Throughout the property, there are statues of women's bodies, explicit uniforms that girls were required to wear, explicit artwork, hundreds of sexual items, and in Epstein's private office, framed photographs of his victims mounted on the walls. He looked at them every day. Little St. James is a genuinely beautiful island, clear blue water, tropical vegetation, bright buildings against lush hills. That contrast sits in the chest in a way that is difficult to describe, the beauty and the horror occupying exactly the same physical space. The island contains guest bungalows where the abuse occurred, a pool, a sun circle constructed from stone with benches arranged around it in a way that appears designed for rituals. The striped tower that attracted so much speculation was found to contain nothing particularly significant in its interior. The main mansion follows the same pattern as Manhattan, an extravagant office, multiple bedrooms, explicit items distributed throughout. Among the released photographs from these properties are images of underage girls. These are from modeling portfolios that Epstein maintained. Their faces are young. They look like teenagers because they were teenagers. There are images of them on yachts, in cars, at birthday parties, and in the same rooms where the abuse took place. The FBI failed to properly redact the faces of some victims in the released files. I have seen some of those unredacted images. Some of these girls are wearing braces. If you saw them at your local school, they would simply look like the other students. I will not show their faces, out of respect for these children and out of respect for what was done to them. In one photograph, a man holds up the identification card of an underage girl toward the camera. He is not concealing it. He is presenting it. They stole these girls' lives, and they were proud enough to document it. The final files I want to address are among the most disturbing in the entire release. In 2009, Epstein wrote to an unidentified recipient, "I loved the torture video." In 2011, he wrote to an associate named Tonraid Mariolo, "Do you want me to try to do her or just torture her?" The Department of Justice has not explained these emails. No investigation has been opened specifically in relation to them. They sit in the publicly released files, and no one in authority has been asked to account for what they mean. There are hundreds of explicit photographs of underage victims in the released files. The FBI has not released everything. Only 3.5 million of the over 6 million total files have been made public. What was withheld includes internal Department of Justice memos explaining why powerful individuals were not prosecuted, intelligence-related materials, and approximately 70 to 80% of what was actually presented in court. The attorney representing victims described the partial release as, in her words, the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in a single day in United States history. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and is currently serving a 20-year sentence in a minimum security facility. In a 2025 interview with the Trump administration's Deputy Attorney General, she stated that Trump and Clinton were completely innocent, denied introducing Andrew to Epstein, denied any personal wrongdoing, and claimed to have no knowledge of any surveillance systems in Epstein's properties, despite the fact that every room in every one of those properties was wired for continuous recording. On February 10, 2026, Maxwell appeared before the House Oversight Committee and invoked the Fifth Amendment more than a dozen times. Her attorney stated publicly that she is prepared to speak fully and honestly if granted clemency by President Trump. The most prominent convicted trafficker in modern history is negotiating her silence with the sitting president of the United States. The first batch of Epstein Files, released in December 2025, was so heavily redacted that it provoked immediate public outrage. A second larger release followed on January 30th, 2026. Faulty redactions in some documents meant that blacked-out content could be recovered simply by copying and pasting into another application. As of today, only roughly half of the total files have been made public. Epstein is dead, Brunel is dead, Maxwell is in prison and has said nothing. Those are the only results from the largest known trafficking network in American history. Every other person named in these files, every powerful associate, every co-conspirator granted immunity in the 2008 plea deal, has faced 0 charges, 0 prosecution, and 0 accountability. On January 30th, 2026, the Deputy Attorney General addressed this publicly and stated that the presence of emails, photographs, and disturbing material does not in itself allow for prosecution, and that the review is complete. The review is complete. No one is being charged. The official position of the United States government is that nothing in 3.5 million pages about the world's most prolific known trafficking network rises to the level of requiring any powerful person to answer for it. Virginia Giuffre spent the second half of her short life in courtrooms, in hospitals, fighting for custody of her children, and giving testimony against men whose responses came through press spokespeople. She started this story trying to learn a trade and build a life. She ended it at 41 years old in Western Australia, while the men whose names fill those files remain in their homes. The photograph still exists, the one she held in trembling hands and said, "I am not sure I should be showing you this." Ghislaine, grinning, Prince Andrew's arm around a 16-year-old girl, taken hours before what came next. That photograph exists. Her testimony exists. Her memoir exists. Her father's words exist. More than 6 million files exist, and the people responsible are still walking free. Jeffrey Epstein built his power on one truth. He understood that the most powerful people in the world are also the most afraid. Afraid of losing what they have built. Afraid of what the person across the table already knows. He fed that fear deliberately and systematically, and in doing so, he made himself impossible to touch. Not because of his own power, but because everyone around him had too much to lose from his exposure. Thousands of people knew, law enforcement knew, governments knew, and the silence held for decades. 3 million more files have not been released. People are already beginning to forget. And that is precisely what the people named in those files are counting on. If this story means anything to you, share it. These girls' stories deserve to be heard. The public is the only force left that can hold the Department of Justice accountable, because every institution that was supposed to do it has already chosen not to. Thank you for staying with me through this. I will be watching closely for any further file releases, and when they come, I will cover them in full. Take care of yourself after this one.